Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really big one, a figure just steeped in centuries of, well, debate and a lot of modern speculation, the Biblical Antichrist.
Definitely a heavy topic.
Yeah, and look, our goal here isn't about taking a specific religious stance. It's more about giving you the clearest view we can based on the sources we've got. And we have quite a stack merging prophetic texts like Daniel, Isaiah, Revelation, with more modern geopolitical thinking.
Right. And it's a fascinating mix of sources. You've got everything from, say, academic AI responses, looking at doctrine, all the way to some pretty deep theological speculation about spiritual lines and world events.
So our job today is really to pull out the specific, concrete details these interpretations seem to agree on about this future figure.
Exactly.
Oh,
Synthesizing what these particular sources are putting forward.
okay, let's get into it. Starting with geography seems logical. It's often foundational in prophecy, right?
Mm.
And the consensus in these sources, it seems to point overwhelmingly towards an Eastern origin for this false king figure. So how do they justify focusing on the Eastern Roman Empire part? And why is that label the Assyrian? Why is that so crucial?
Okay, yeah. It really starts with that famous vision Daniel interprets for King Nebuchadnezzar. You know, the statue in Daniel chapter 2.
The big statue made of different metals.
That's the one. The final phase, the end times empires, are represented by the feet and the toes.
Mm.
And the sources generally interpret that as the kingdoms that come after Rome.
And they're made of iron mixed with clay, which I always took to mean strength, but also instability.
Precisely. The iron is that Roman strength, its legacy, but the clay signifies instability. Like you said, fragile alliances, maybe incompatible ideologies that just don't mesh properly. They don't stick together.
Okay, so feet and toes. But
Yeah.
the key bit is the 10 toes.
Exactly. 10 toes means 10 end times kings or kingdoms. And the standard historical interpretation, it splits the old Roman Empire's legacy. You get 5 toes for the Western leg, think Rome, modern Europe.
And 5 for the eastern leg, centered around Byzantium, Constantinople, modern Turkey, basically.
Right. Now you have these 2 legs, west and east, but the sources we looked at, they lean very heavily towards the east.
Okay, why? Why is the West less emphasized in these interpretations?
Well, it circles back to that very specific title he's given in some prophecies, the Assyrian. You find this in Old Testament books like Isaiah 10 or Micah 5.
Yes, Syrian.
Yeah. And the sources see 2 main ways to read that. One is symbolic. Maybe he just acts like the ancient Assyrians, cruel, conquest-driven.
Sure.
Or it's literal. It points to a specific place.
And that's where the geography comes back in, locking it down.
Exactly that. Ancient Assyria, geographically. It covered northern Iraq, parts of Syria, and southeastern Turkey.
Mm.
Now, overlay that with the map of the Eastern Roman Empire's core territories, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, the Balkans.
Ah, I see. The geography lines up.
It fits the Assyrian label remarkably well. And crucially, the prophecies using that specific Assyrian title, they just don't mention Western Europe. So the conclusion drawn in these sources is, well, there's a high likelihood he actually arises from that eastern leg territory. It connects the prophetic name to the geopolitical map.
Okay, so that sets the stage. Somewhere in that really volatile region, the Middle East and its neighbors. But that immediately throws up a huge question about his identity. This is critical for the deception aspect, isn't it?
Absolutely critical.
If the Jewish people are expecting their Messiah, the Mashiach, and he must be a descendant of King David, does this Assyrian, potentially Gentile figure have to be Jewish?
This is probably where the debate gets most intense in the source material.
Yeah.
They all point out, look, the true Messiah has incredibly specific criteria to meet. Jewish, yes. Verifiable Davidic lineage, absolutely. Rebuild the temple, bring world peace.
High bar.
Very. But the Antichrist isn't the true Messiah. He's a false Messiah. A pseudo-Christos, the New Testament term.
Right. And Jesus himself predicted, didn't he, that Israel would accept another who comes in his own name. So that initial acceptance, that's the key part of the deception.
That's the engine driving it all.
Yeah.
So for this Antichrist figure to gain any traction, especially with the religious establishment, the temple priests, and a significant part of Israel, he has to, at the very least, look the part. He has to appear Jewish, claim Davidic descent.
So that's the argument for him having some kind of Jewish connection. The deception demands it.
That's the strong argument, yes. He needs to present the expected credentials to be accepted, even initially.
But hang on, if he's called the Assyrian, which sounds very Gentile, and didn't you say Daniel 9 kind of implies he comes from the people who destroyed the temple, which most people interpret as the Romans? So Gentile again. How do the sources square that circle? It seems like a direct contradiction.
It really does. And that leads them down the path of saying, well, perhaps deception is his primary characteristic, more so than actual blood heritage. He might not need to be ethically Jewish.
But he will claim to be.
Exactly. He will present himself as Jewish, potentially with completely fabricated credentials, a faked Davidic lineage maybe, enough to fool the religious gatekeepers, at least at first. He has to successfully pose as the awaited Mashiach ben David.
Wow. So he's the ultimate imposter, mimicking the resume of the very person he's aiming to replace.
Okay, this intense expectation in Israel for a messianic figure, it brings us to the timeline of his rise, doesn't it?
It really does. The sources definitely highlight that modern Israel is, well, primed. You have Orthodox rabbis actively preparing for the Third Temple's reconstruction. The atmosphere is charged, waiting for a leader who can resolve that massive geopolitical and religious knot, the Temple Mount status.
And provide peace and security, presumably.
That's the promise. So the stage is perfectly set for a charismatic political figure to step in.
Okay, and this is where the famous 7-year period kicks in. Daniel's 70th week, they call it. What happens in the first half? Right, the first 3.5 years. This is his ascent, his period of gaining trust and acceptance. He emerges as a significant world leader, and critically, he confirms a 7-year covenant or treaty with the many.
The many? Who is that, according to the sources?
The strongest suggestion is that this treaty is specifically with Israel, possibly involving key religious leaders, maybe even broader international religious figures. It's that Daniel 9.27 passage.
And this covenant, this treaty, it's like the key that unlocks everything else for him.
Absolutely. It's the mechanism. It allows, even facilitates, the rebuilding of the temple, and the daily sacrifices, which haven't happened for nearly 2 millennia, they resume.
So he's playing directly into the deepest hopes of religious Jews.
He's imitating the ultimate rabbinic hope, precisely. He delivers, seemingly on world peace, the restoration of temple worship, global respect. It's why he's embraced, why many will believe he is the legitimate Mashiach.
Smooth sailing for 3.5 years then. But it's a setup. How do the sources explain that shift? The betrayal at the midpoint seems so sudden, so radical, going from peace broker to, well, global monster.
That sudden flip is the absolute core of the tragedy in the prophecy. Right at the midpoint, 3.5 years, 1,260 days, he breaks the covenant he made.
Just tears it up.
Throws it away. And that's when he commits what Jesus called the abomination of desolation, mentioned in Matthew 24. He forcibly stops the temple sacrifices he previously enabled.
And sets the stage for his ultimate claim.
Which is claiming divinity.
He declares himself God.
Yes. It's stark in 2 Thessalonians 2 and Revelation 13. He literally declares himself G-I-D and demands the world worship him. And immediately following that, massive, horrific persecution begins against anyone who refuses.
Let's really focus on that moment of declaration because it involves this just staggering act of blasphemy inside the temple itself. That specific verse, 2 Thessalonians 2.4, it says, "He will sit in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God." Why is the act of sitting so loaded with meaning here?
Oh, it's incredibly significant. It's not just entering. It's a calculated intrusion into the holiest place imaginable, the Holy of Holies.
Where only the high priest could go once a year.
Exactly, on Yom Kippur. Even just standing there, which is what Mark's gospel hints at with standing where he does not belong, is utter desecration.
But sitting implies something more, doesn't it? More than just being present.
It absolutely does. In, well, pretty much every ancient culture, sitting implies authority. Ruling, judging, being enthroned. Think of Psalm 110. Sit at my right hand. God sits on his throne. Christ sits at the Father's right hand.
And the high priest.
The high priest never sat in the Holy of Holies. Ever. So, by sitting there, the Antichrist isn't just trespassing. He's enacting the ultimate claim. He's usurping divine authority in God's designated house.
And the sources take this even further, right? They connect the act of sitting directly to the Ark of the Covenant?
Yes, and that's where the sheer audacity, the gravity of this prophetic claim really hits you. Historically, the Ark of the Covenant was the object within the Holy of Holies. And on top of the Ark was its lid, the mercy seat, the kapareh in Hebrew. Exodus 25 is explicit. The mercy seat is where God's presence would dwell between the cherubim. It was considered the very throne of God on earth.
Wow. So if the Antichrist sits on that spot, or maybe in place of where the mercy seat should be, he's not just desecrating the temple building, he's physically declaring himself to be the Shekinah, the actual divine presence on earth.
It's the most profound physical claim imaginable. a blasphemous assertion that he is Yahweh occupying God's earthly throne. It's the ultimate statement.
But, okay, wait. There's a huge practical issue here. The Ark of the Covenant has been missing for over 2,500 years since the Babylonians destroyed the first temple.
Right, so it's about 586 BC.
So how does this prophecy even work if the Ark isn't there?
And the sources absolutely grapple with this. They acknowledge the historical reality, but their interpretation is that for this specific prophecy, the sitting in the temple, claiming godhood to be fulfilled with the kind of impact described, the Ark must be rediscovered.
It has to be found and presumably put back in the Holy of Holies in this rebuilt third temple.
That's the implication. Its rediscovery would lend immense legitimacy to the rebuilt temple, validating the resumption of sacrifices. And crucially, it makes the Antichrist's final act of sitting on, or in place of, the mercy seat physically possible and symbolically devastating.
So the Ark's return is almost a prerequisite, according to these interpretations, for the ultimate blasphemy to occur.
It elevates the entire scenario. It makes his act not just symbolic defiance, but a literal usurpation of the physical, recognized throne of God on earth.
That is an unbelievable level of audacity. Spiritually, politically, how could any, well, human being pull that off and get the world to basically adore him for it? What makes him so unique? The sources touch on genetics, spirituality.
Yeah, they argue that for a human being to actually sit on that mercy seat and command global worship, he can't just be another politician. He must be, as they put it, incredible and unique. And they trace this uniqueness all the way back to the Garden Eden, to the very first prophecy given right after the fall of man.
You mean the promise to Eve about her seed?
That's the one, Genesis 3.15. Jehovah promises Eve that her seed, which Christians interpret as Jesus, would ultimately crush Lucifer. But crucially, Lucifer's seed would strike the heel, would wound Eve's seed.
Okay, Lucifer's seed. How are the sources interpreting that genetically?
That's the provocative interpretation they put forward, that just as Jesus was genetically unique, the concept theologians call a hypostatic union, the perfect joining of divine and human natures.
They're suggesting the Antichrist is also unique in his nature, but in a demonic way.
They imply that Lucifer somehow seeks to mimic this, to interject his own seed, his essence or influence, into the human lineage, maybe even specifically targeting the Davidic line, given the messianic requirement, creating a human host who is a dark mirror, a demonic counterfeit of the divine incarnation.
Wow, so Lucifer trying to get himself enthroned through a human descendant. That's heavy.
It's the ultimate counterfeit ambition. And look, his popularity isn't just based on charisma or political skill. The texts are clear. It's backed by overwhelming supernatural power. Lying signs and wonders, Scripture calls them.
Like the false prophet, his sidekick, calling down fire from heaven for everyone to see.
Exactly. Miracles, spectacle, power displays, all designed to mimic God's power and secure worship through awe and fear. It's spiritual darkness manifesting as raw power.
And this all ties into how he starts.
It seems so. The sources suggest that in his initial phase, before the mask fully slips, the Antichrist deliberately takes on the persona of King Solomon.
Solomon, wise, wealthy, the great builder, brought peace.
Precisely. The wisest, most glorious king. He uses that image, peace, prosperity, global cooperation, to initiate what the sources term a Luciferian globalist reset. A new world order presented as the solution to everything.
Which starts looking like paradise.
But rapidly descends into the worst tyranny humanity has ever known. The Solomon mask hides the Assyrian reality.
Okay, this deep dive, it certainly lived up to the name complex. We've covered a lot. The strong likelihood, based on these sources, of an Eastern Assyrian origin. The absolute necessity of him claiming, probably faking, Davidic lineage to get that initial acceptance in Israel.
Right. The deception is key.
Then that very specific 7-year timeline the covenant made, then brutally broken at the exact midpoint.
3.5 years of peace, then chaos.
And culminating in that ultimate act of blasphemy, sitting on or in place of the mercy seat in the temple, claiming to be God.
The usurpation of Yahweh's throne.
And underpinned by this idea of a unique, perhaps genetically altered spiritual nature mimicking Christ himself.
Yes. If you weave all those threads together from the sources, the picture that emerges is one of ultimate mimicry. He copies the Messiah's required credentials, he counterfeits the Son of God's unique nature, and he physically usurps the very throne of God on earth. He's designed, you could say, to be the perfect, irresistible counterfeit meant to replace everything truly sacred.
So here's something to think about, maybe a final thought pre-listening. The sources strongly suggest this Antichrist figure kicks things off By embodying the character of King Solomon, remember, the wisest, most successful, peace-bringing king in Israel's history, to launch this global reset. What does it tell us, really, about the nature of deception itself when the greatest tyranny the world will supposedly ever see begins by perfectly mimicking the image of the most benevolent and respected ruler? Something to definitely ponder as you reflect on the source material we've explored today.